All right, come on.
All right.
Nice.
There might be something usable in there.
I think there's something in there, yeah. It's Friends with Deficits, the game show about life and death. And wait, this isn't a game. This is reality. Just ask my next friend, John McCane. When he's not beatboxing like you just heard, he's dealing with this unpleasant disorder known as Wegener's vasculitis. I'll have John fill you in on the details, as well as do some more beatboxing. He also composed some original music for the show. So sit back and relax, unless you're driving. I'm your host, Adam Sultan. Enjoy the show.
Friends with Deficits.
Until I started kindergarten, I had this really embarrassing nickname that I didn't know was embarrassing because I was a kid, right? So the first five years of my life, everybody in my family called me Booger. And, I know,
Does that
right?
have to do something with your habits?
That's what they claim, but I don't remember being overly picky when I was a kid, if you know what I mean. And so when I got to the first day of kindergarten, the teacher saw my name and she said, it's like, well, what do you want to be called? Robert, Bobby, something like that? And I was like, yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, I remember at the time thinking that Robert sounded really serious or really official, and Bobby sounded like the opposite end of the spectrum, and Bob was like, even as a kid, I knew that wasn't acceptable. And so I said, yeah, no, everybody calls me Booger. And she's like, kind of took me aside, like, we can't call you that. And so she said, what does the J stand for? And I said, I don't know. I guess John. I couldn't think of anything cool. But the story on that is my mother and my father never really got along, even from the first day, and they got married because their parents kind of forced him to, and he was drunk at the time, like he didn't even know what was going on. And so his name was Robert James Peterson, and he wanted me to be a junior, and my mother didn't want that, so she just left it as a J on the birth certificate to avoid conflict, but also to not make me a James. And so I guess I named myself.
Really?
And
So
I couldn't think of any cool J names. I said, I don't know, John.
your middle name is just a J?
On the birth certificate it was. And then when I was 10, my grandparents adopted my brother and I. And since I'd been going by John forever, the new birth certificate that says McCane on it says John. But the original Peterson one, it was just a
Does
J.
it say Robert John, or does it just say John McCain?
You knew it says Robert John. So they kept my first name as it was, but I've never used it ever.
Okay.
And so, but yeah, I wish I'd been able to think of a cooler name than John.
Well, if you put DJ in front of it.
Yeah, that's right. DJ J-Mac.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I am curious about Wegener's vasculitis.
Oh, yeah.
Vascular or whatever.
Yeah, vasculitis. Yeah, that was I don't like it.
Yeah.
That's no good.
Well, first of all, what is it? Just vasculitis? Because I tried to look this up, and there's like I wrote this down too. The granulomatosis with polyangiitis.
Yeah.
Is that what you have?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
I think it's just Wegener's for short, or
right.
Wingers for short.
Wingers.
Yeah, so I guess when it comes to vasculitis, there are a bunch of different types, and some of them are really just annoying but not dangerous. Like there's one type, and I don't remember all the names, but there's one type that basically all it does is attack your salivary glands, and so you just end up having cotton mouth for the rest of your life. And the only downside to that is without the, your normal mouth saliva lube, you can, your teeth can have some problems with your teeth or something. But basically, it's just like having cotton mouth.
So what is vasculitis as a general term?
Well, it's an autoimmune thing. So your immune system attacks parts of your body thinking that it's, some invader of some kind. And so in the case of that mild one, it attacks the salivary glands for some reason. And then the really ugly one, which is the one I've got, it attacks small blood vessels in your body. So usually, in the case, the most common ways that it presents itself are it'll start attacking your lungs or your kidneys first. And that's not as bad as it sounds, because typically the symptoms from that, they spot them in plenty of time before any kind of serious damage happens. But in my case, it was completely weird stuff. And so the very obvious things that caused them to be able to diagnose it were that it caused this the sac around my heart, the pericardial sac, to fill up with like pus, and almost a liter of it. And so there was so much of that kind of pressing on my heart that my heart was barely beating. And I guess there's not a lot of room in your chest. And so because there was so much, it was also impacting my lungs. And so for a week, I just kind of laid in bed and had some friends checking on me, because my doctor thought it was a reaction to some medication. And if I just stopped taking the medication, she's like, oh, you'll be okay in about a week. Just, sleep it off or something. And it turns out that that wasn't the case at all. By the time it got to the point where I was literally delirious from not getting enough oxygen, I remember I was laying in my bed. I felt like I weighed 1,000,000 pounds, and I had a friend there just kind of hanging out, keeping an eye on me. And she was watching some Luke Cage on Netflix, some sort of superhero fighting deal. And I remember being so delirious that I was hearing what was going on in there. And I thought that fight was actually happening in my house. And I was like, oh, God, any minute the door is going to blow off its hinges and they're going to be duking it out in my bedroom. And I can't even get out of bed. And so I've got a 14-year-old daughter, or 15-year-old daughter now. And she was coming for a visit, and she happened to arrive the day after that. My friend and her helped me get up and get some clothes on. And I just went to the ER, because I just knew whatever was going on, it was getting worse, even in my oxygen-deprived state of mind. And I got to the hospital, and they were like, oh, yeah, this guy, you got to go somewhere else. We can't even deal with what you have here. And so they threw me in an ambulance and took me to a bigger one. And at first they told me I had this fluid around my heart, and they were just going to like sort of stab a needle in my chest and draw it out. And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't sound too terrible. And then what seemed like...
It doesn't sound terrible?
Well, compared to what I thought it might be.
Okay.
And so they came back a few minutes later, and they were like, actually, no, we're going to have to do some surgery. And they were like shaving my chest as they were talking to me. And I was like, okay. And so they were trying to have me sign some stuff. And so they put the little thing on my face, and off I went. And it was really pretty awful. And so I guess there was more of it than they thought at first. And after some additional imaging, they decided that the old needle trick wouldn't work, and they would have to slice me open. And it was supposed to be some 4-hour surgery, and it took 12 hours, and all these complications, and it was really bad. I mean, I'm glad I was sleeping through it all, because it, could have turned out a lot differently. But they ended up breaking out the bone saw and cutting off part of my sternum and wrapping a tube around my heart, which they left in. And so for a couple of days in the ICU, I just had this giant plastic tube sticking out of a hole in my abdomen, and just draining into this little thing that was pumping it out. And it looked like this green, opaque kind of paste that was coming out. And it was just all around my heart. Ugh. Yeah. And they had no idea what it was, because whenever they would send samples of this stuff to the lab, it would come back sterile, like no pathogens. Usually when your pericardial sac, when something like that happens, it's some kind of bacterial infection, and your body freaks out and tries to fight it. And in this case, they were like, there's nothing in there. It's just sterile, just white blood cells. Like there's nothing that, we don't know what this is. And so that caused me to be pretty ill at ease, because in my thinking, like, well, this could happen again anytime. Like, what caused it? We don't know.
When did this first happen? Like, when did you start to feel some symptoms?
It was almost exactly a year ago. There were a couple of odd events that happened, maybe even a year before that seemed like they could have been related. Like, I had a kidney stone a year or two ago, and that just went off normal, and there was nothing unusual about that. But I had this little tiny bump that I'd had for a couple of years that was on my right side, kind of up under my right chest kind of area, and it was hard but pretty small. And when I was in the ER, because I didn't know it was a kidney stone, and so I was in there, they gave me some morphine. They were trying to, they figured out what it was pretty quick. But in the course of that ER visit, which was just an hour or two, this little bump that had been there for at least 1 year grew to this really giant, it seemed like a golf ball under my skin. And so, they let me go, and I went to my regular doctor after that to see about this thing that sprouted up on my side, and she said, oh, it's just a cyst or something. I'll have to, drain it, and it'll be unpleasant, and you'll have to come in every day for a couple of days, and I'll work it out, And the lab results came back, and she was like, there's nothing in this. It's completely sterile. Like, your body just decided that it was sending some white blood cells to fight nothing. Like, there's no pathogen at all. And I thought that was weird, but we didn't really think anything more of it. Sometime after that, because of the kidney stone stuff, I went in and they blasted that out. But they had to do some imaging, of course, and they noticed that on my right kidney there was some kind of cyst on top of that. And they deemed it not really to be dangerous, and they said sometimes that happens to everybody, and they come and go, and most people don't even notice they'd been there. But by the time it got noticeable to me, it was really serious. Well, and also the disease, all forms of the disease are exceedingly rare. And so what I was told was that there were maybe 3 experts in the whole world, and they were all in the Cleveland clinic up in Ohio, and then one of them retired right as I was getting it. So every hospital in the world, the treatment they have for it came from these people at the Cleveland Clinic. So not a lot is known about it even. They know it's autoimmune, and it seems to not be genetic exactly, because if people who have it, nobody else in their family tends to have it at all. And they do know that certain medications, very rare side effects, that can be a result in certain environmental things. But they said really the only way they have to test that is to stop the treatment and see if you get sick again. But they're like, but then you could die if it happens again. And so the doctors decided that was too risky. And it took them a while to figure it out too. So I think I was in the ICU for like 3 weeks because it was really bad. And I remember, my heart and lungs were so weakened from it all that, my daily exercise, I had to walk in a circle around the floor that I was in. And by the time I was done, I just couldn't even breathe almost. I felt great otherwise, but, and I had to be on oxygen the whole time because it really put a hurting on my lungs mainly. And I found out later that it had scarred them up quite a bit. And so if I have any kind of sharp inhalation of breath, like I'm about to sneeze or something, it's really painful when it gets really full. Like at the top of that, it's just this like getting stabbed kind of feeling. So I used to really love sneezing, but I don't like it anymore.
Yeah. I hope you don't have allergies.
Well, yeah. Well, actually, I've got some, and this whole weekend I've spent just coughing and hacking, and it's unpleasant.
What causes the scarring? Sorry, did that hurt?
It did a little bit.
Oh, shit.
In my case, I think it was the pressure from the pericardial sac being so full, kind of pushing the lungs up against the rib cage, and I guess maybe they're not as hardy outside of the body, and so they can't take a lot of abuse. So the scarring is on the outside of the lungs. And so it's a bunch of scar tissue. And so I guess the scar tissue formed when the lungs were a little bit compressed or at rest. The lung was smaller when the tissue formed. And so when you take a deep breath, it stretches that scar tissue, and it can be pretty painful. I was pretty displeased. But even when all that was happening, they still didn't know what was causing it. And they had a bunch of doctors coming in from all over the hospital because they were curious, like, well, what is this thing this guy has that there's no infection of any kind, but his body's acting like, and they were thinking like, well, it's got to be some autoimmune thing. Maybe it's lupus. Maybe it's this or that. And they tested for all those things and nothing showed up. And I guess vasculitis is so rare, maybe like less than 100,000 or 200,000 cases a year, I think worldwide, out of 7 billion people. I mean, that's almost nobody. Yeah. And so there's just really not a lot known about it. So that would have been the absolute last thing they would have tested for. I was in there for almost 3 weeks, tested everything, and then they sent me on my way, and they suggested maybe I should go see a rheumatologist. to see if it was somehow related to something, and that's where it got diagnosed. So, but then, another thing that happened that really got me nervous, though, is after I got sent home from the ICU, but before the rheumatologist figured it out, there was a few weeks after I got out of the ICU where I was having trouble breathing again, and I was like, oh my God, is it happening again? Because we still didn't know what it was. So I went back to the ER, and they said that my left lung around it had filled up with this fluid again, but it was around my lung this time. And so that time they stuck a needle in the back and drew it all out, and it ended up being maybe like a little more than half a liter. And it was just this like see-through green kind of, it looked like Gatorade kind of, like almost glowing a bit. And I was like, man, is this going to keep happening every couple of weeks? And my fingers, my joints hurt really bad. And I was really bummed out. I was, trying to play some instruments, and I was like, oh my God, I can't even, my knees were killing me. And I think maybe that's why they suggested a rheumatologist. They thought it might be some kind of rheumatoid arthritis or some other sort of thing happening as well. And then after that, when they figured it out, I guess the treatment is this chemotherapy drug. And so I've done that about 3 times, and it's a pretty unpleasant experience for sure. But that seemed to knock all of it out, and these inflammation markers that show up on the tests, mine have gotten, back down to normal. And about every 6 months I have to go in and do it again. And maybe not for the rest of my life. I think they want to do maybe 2 years worth. And then I just come in for some labs occasionally instead of just keep nuking me with that stuff. Because they were telling me that, this medication, it's called Rituxan. Not too terrible, it'll get the job done, but there is a 30% increase in a chance of bladder cancer, like something really specific. And my doctor's like, but don't worry, if that happens, they'll just make you a new one out of a piece of your intestine. And I was like, I'm gonna worry because So anyway, that's most of the general saga.
So you're on chemo now, or you're every 6 months?
Yeah, every 6 months. Yeah, the side effects of that are different for everybody, but in my case, they're really unpleasant. They cause me to turn completely red and be itchy all over, and my throat kind of starts swelling shut. It's really hard to swallow, and then they always freak out, even though I tell them that's going to happen, and they start jamming me full of Benadryl, and everything gets okay again, and then the rest of the second half of the day, I'm just like half asleep because of all the Benadryl. So I've gotten into a routine with it where it's not so bad. But
is that like one day of these adverse effects?
Yeah, of those effects, it's one day. But the general effects last for 2 or 3 days, where I just feel super lethargic and pretty mostly lethargic, and I just feel like I just weigh a ton and it's hard to move around. I just feel like I'm really, really tired and heavy. Yeah, but it's better than dying, I guess.
Hi, y'all. This is Adam again. We'll be back in a minute, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about how you could help support the Friends with Deficits podcast by visiting patreon.com/friendswithdeficits and consider becoming a subscriber. At any amount, you help support the show, as well as become part of a community where we have greater interaction with each other. You can ask questions of myself, my guests, the show in general. I'll also be posting things to the exclusive Patreon feed, such as unreleased material, songs, videos, whatever I can think of. So please consider helping out. In fact, I'd like to give a shout out to those who already have become patrons of the Friends with Deficits podcast. Normal Cereal, Jake Lorfing, Lisa Marie Pinder, Matthew Sultan, I think I know that guy, Paul Golding, Rose Signs, Steve Moore, and Tom Benton. I'm super grateful for their help. And you can help too by checking out patreon.com/friendswithdeficits. Thanks a lot, and let's get back to the show.
I'd been reading about this when I first heard about it, and I guess even as recent as the early 80s, if you were diagnosed with this stuff, you had maybe 3 months to live. They couldn't do anything about it. They could give you a steroid treatment that would get rid of some of the inflammation that was causing this stuff, but it really just bought you a couple of months and you were gone. So I guess at some point these people at the Cleveland Clinic started working on it and figured out that certain things would kill it, because I guess it's has something to do with this, something weird happening to your red blood cells that I guess causes your immune system to freak out. And so the chemo treatments kill all of these abnormal cells. And then some people get lucky and they don't ever come back. They just grow back normally. And some people just have to constantly be dealing with it. So I would assume that would mean maybe it's from some of the environmental causes, those can be removed and then it never happens to you again. But those are very poorly understood too. It's very little is known about it, and that's not fun for me.
Yeah.
Do
you have any ideas of what could cause it for you? Or?
Well, there were a few medications that when you look down the list of side effects, way down at the bottom of a couple of them, it would say vasculitis.
Oh, really?
Was possible. And one of them was a statin, which I never understood why the doctor was having me take it, because my lab results have always been pretty normal. My cholesterol is not anywhere near high. It's completely normal.
Is that a cholesterol drug?
Yeah, it's like a cholesterol reducing drug. And she told me basically like, well, there's some new guidelines out, and I think you should just take it like as a preventative thing. And I was like, I'm okay, really. I mean, I've never smoked. I don't drink much, and I don't even I rarely even eat meat, and I have never had a problem with cholesterol. And she's like, well, just it wouldn't hurt, And so at first we thought that might be causing some of these things before it got really bad, before we knew what it was. And so that was actually one of the drugs that she thought, well, just stop taking it, and then after a week you'll feel better. So that's why instead of going to the hospital, I just stayed in my house and just descended into, oxygen-deprived mental tomfoolery.
Have you gone back to that drug?
No, not at all.
How's your cholesterol?
It's still just normal, just like right in the middle, not high, not low.
Why were they prescribing it?
Well, she told me that there was some new thing she read and some new guidelines that, for somebody my age, the old guidelines, I'd be like right in the middle. But with these new guidelines, I was still normal, but in the high end. And she thought, it'll just be, they're cheap and, just get you down to like super low, basically. And I was like, yeah, nobody else is.
That sounds like a case of like big pharma work.
Yeah, it kind of does, yeah. And that's kind of the feeling I was getting from her about some of the choices she was making. And so, because I have a lot of other friends that are actually in pretty bad shape, and they've got, things like type 2 diabetes, and they're super overweight, high blood pressure, and when I tell them about some of my medical adventures, there's like, my doctor never said to do that. And, so it could be some over-prescribing of things. And, there are always the little pharmaceutical company salespeople running in with free samples and gifts for the doctor and stuff, and posters on the wall from whatever company it was. So the chemo stuff is sort of like the bomb that kind of clears it all out. But before I started that, a way to get it under control really quickly is this steroid called prednisone.
Oh, yeah.
And that's ugly stuff. And the dose was so high, like 70 milligrams, I think, a day at first. And that drug really, it's got some kind of stress hormone in it. Cortisol, I guess. And so the effects that it has on people, it just can make them like rage filled for no apparent reason. And it makes you feel like you're constantly in the fight or flight mode. And so it was rough. And so I took this huge high dose, and it makes you put on a bunch of weight. So within 2 weeks, I put on 30 pounds, and I didn't feel like I was eating more than usual. And another thing about it, because of that cortisol component, just like if you were in a stressful real world adversarial situation, whatever fat your body does make from the food migrates to your stomach or under your neck. And so my entire body shape changed just within a few days of taking this stuff. And I constantly felt like somebody was going to jump out of some bushes and punch me. Even though I knew that wasn't happening, I still had that anxiety and this physical, like, it was really awful. And I remember going to a band audition right after this had happened, and I'd gotten on this steroid. And I remember telling them, like, well, I'm prepared, I've got the stuff, and I'm going to play just fine, but if I seem a little unusual, it's because I'm on this drug.
If I punch you.
If I punch you in the face, or if I start screaming and try to climb under the rug or something, that's going to get better as they taper the dosage down. But I was just, like, pouring sweat the whole time and just,
how did you do?
I got the gig.
Pretty good.
Yeah, I got the gig.
You must have real chops.
Yeah, I was fighting through the desire to run away and hide and lock the car doors, but yeah, it worked out pretty good. It was fun, but yeah, so that was probably the worst part of it, because I went from feeling crappy to feeling better, but not even recognizing myself in the mirror anymore. I've been heavier than this and I've been lighter than this, but the way that it distributes the fat on your body, you just look like a different person. But luckily, the treatment seems to have worked pretty well, and it seems to work for most people who deal with it. And so as long as you can afford to do it and maintain the schedule of it, then the lifespan looks relatively normal, and in some people it goes into remission and never comes back. So hoping I'll be one of those types of people.
Is it the same treatment for pretty much everybody?
It is, yeah. It seems to be this chemo biological, I think they call it. It's like a component of chemo, so it's not the radiation. Like, it doesn't make your hair fall out, but it's still pretty hard on you though. But yeah, it seems to be the same treatment for everything, which is to just kill these specific cells that have kind of gone a little sideways, and the body starts to attack them. So in my case specifically, it's this idea that this very small blood vessels get attacked, and so that's why the issues tend to be more with organs than just muscles or something. Yeah, it was pretty unfun. I can't say that enough. That's for sure.
Yeah,
pretty scary, especially before they figured out what it was, because it could happen again, anytime.
Yeesh.
So, yeah.
Has your health been relatively good throughout your life up to this point?
It has. Yeah, it's been really great. I've always felt really good and annoyingly energetic, according to other people, and way too jabbery and talky. And but since that, I would say the year or two leading up to the big event, I just really started feeling super lethargic physically, and just really not wanting to get out and do anything. And I used to chalk that up to my failing marriage at the time, and just horribly mismatched personalities, and just like, well, I guess I'm just gonna coast to the finish line. I'm just gonna sit in my little room and do my little remote work from home job, and then when I'm done, get yelled at for things I don't even understand. And I remember thinking, when I woke up in the hospital, I woke up to them pulling out the ventilator tube, and I wasn't supposed to wake up that early, I guess. And it was the most horrifying feeling to just see this never-ending accordion file segmented tube being pulled out of my throat, and it hurt really bad, and they were just yelling at me to, like, breathe, man, breathe. And so, part of me was panicked, but then I had this other detached voice that was, kind of looking at myself from the outside thinking, yeah, well, wouldn't have been so bad if I just kind of slipped away during surgery, because I was just so demoralized from my life to that point. And then a few days later, I realized, like, man, I really don't want to think about life that way. And then that's why I ended up, auditioning for that band, and, just trying to get out more, because I had been discouraged from doing that kind of stuff in my home life. And, a lot of friends had kind of fallen by the wayside because I would have to tell them no every time they wanted me to do something. And so So the disease in a lot of ways was a wake-up call for me. I mean, I certainly could have continued down that kind of dead soul path I was on, but it made me realize that I should probably get out and not go out that way, And plus, I didn't know how long I had, and I still don't. I mean, it's a thing that could still kill me way sooner than I would like. It probably won't, but it's a possibility. And so, I auditioned for a band, got in this band, and it was pretty fun. And we, had a regular gig every week, did a little tour, and it helped me a lot. It really made me realize I'm pretty good at music. I forgot I could even play one of these things. And in a lot of ways, there are things going in my life right now that are better than anything I've ever experienced. So, yay, vasculitis, I guess.
That's usually one of my questions. Like, what are the benefits of what you're going through? And you
just
answered them.
Yeah. That's exactly it. I mean, the benefits are perhaps not a sense of urgency, because I knew things I wanted to do before that, but I just felt that the situation I was in would be just too ruinous to disrupt, and just not worth what would happen if I did. And this thing made me realize that in a weird way, that I have some value to somebody, if not myself. And so it caused me to just sort of break away from that old life that had really constricted me on all levels. It helped me kind of remember who I was, because I voluntarily just let that stuff fall by the wayside, thinking it was for some noble purpose, and it really was for no good reason at all. And I met some really great people after that, and some really, really awful things happened, and out of that, some really wonderful things happened, and in many ways, I've never felt as fulfilled in my life. Definitely never. I mean, I've been pretty obnoxiously happy in my life, but never in this kind of way that just seems profound to me. Some of the things that I've discovered about myself and some other people in my life now, I didn't even realize that things could be so intense and so, I don't know, I keep saying profound. I can't think of another way for it, but in a lot of ways, this has been the kind of the best thing I think that could have happened to me at this point in my life. So I feel okay about it now.
That's saying a lot.
Yeah, it was pretty fun, pretty great being alive right now. And I like that. I like that feeling.
All right. Thanks to my friend John McCane, and thanks to you all for listening. If you haven't already, please subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast outlet. Also, sign up for our newsletter at friendswithdeficitspodcast.com. I'm Adam Sultan. Catchphrase you later.
Okay, beatbox. Oh, man, that's good.